Back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a trip back in time to the 17th century, the world of theater, to explore Aphra Behn's The Rover.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, and we've got some really great material to work with
That's
today,
wonderful.
including some scholarly articles and even portions of the play itself.
Oh, fantastic.
So we can really get into the nitty-gritty.
Wonderful.
It's almost like a literary detective story.
Yes.
We're going to try to figure out how Behn took existing material and transformed it into something new.
You know, that is one of the really intriguing aspects of this particular play. You see, The Rover, while considered one of Behn's masterpieces,
Right.
was not entirely her own invention.
Oh, interesting.
It was heavily based on a play called Tommaso, or The Wanderer, written by Sir Charles Killigrew.
So it's an adaptation.
And
Okay.
it is an adaptation.
Sometimes I find adaptations even more fascinating than completely original works.
Absolutely.
Because there's this whole extra layer of creativity involved.
Yes.
Taking something that already exists and making it your own.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
It is. And especially in this case, Tommaso was a massive 10-act comedy set in Madrid.
Mm.
It was never actually performed.
Wow. A 10-act play. I can't even imagine. Were audiences back then just used to sitting in the theater for hours on end?
Well, theatrical tastes and conventions were certainly different in the 17th century, but
Mm.
even then a 10-act play would have been quite a challenge. Think about the pacing, the dialogue. It's a massive undertaking to make that work on stage.
I mean, that just seems impossible to me.
Yeah.
To condense that into something that an audience would actually sit through and enjoy.
Yes, and yet Behn managed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
She condensed this behemoth into a two-part play, each with its own distinct unity, and she shifted the setting as well
Okay.
to make it more stage-friendly.
Smart. So she really streamlined the story, I imagine.
Exactly. She streamlined the story, she tightened the dialogue, and she actually gave the characters more depth and complexity.
Hmm.
You'll recognize some of the names. Angelica Bianca, Filippo Mappa, Carouse. These are all from Killigrew's original. But their stories in The Rover are completely transformed.
So was this a common thing back then, this idea of taking another playwright's work and just reworking it?
It was quite common in the 17th century. They called it literary borrowing. And it wasn't seen as a lack of originality.
Ah.
It was more like engaging in a conversation with the past, adding your own voice to the existing chorus.
That's a great way to put it. It reminds me of sampling in music today,
Exactly.
where artists take existing tracks and create something new and unique from them.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, so if Killigrew's Tommaso was the source material for The Rover, did he come up with all those plot points himself?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting. It turns out that Killigrew was a bit of a borrower himself.
Oh, so it's like a chain of borrowing.
It is. It's really quite fascinating.
A game of theatrical telephone.
Precisely. And for instance, he lifted a song straight from Fletcher's The Captain. And there are scenes and characters that directly mirror Ben Jonson's Volpone, which is a satirical play about a greedy Venetian merchant who pretends to be on his deathbed to swindle potential heirs.
That's fantastic. So did audiences back then, were they aware of these borrowed elements? Did they care? Were there any critics standing up in the back and shouting, plagiarism?
You know, that is a question that scholars have debated for quite some time. It does make you think about how different the concept of authorship was back then.
Right.
But speaking of borrowed elements, I have to ask you about that rather colorful incident with Blunt,
Yes.
where he ends up robbed and tossed into a sewer.
Oh, yes. That's a memorable scene.
That particular plot point actually has its roots in Boccaccio's Decameron, which is a 14th century collection of novellas.
Wow.
And it's a tale that had already made its way onto the English stage in Middleton's Blurt Master Constable.
So bathroom humor has a long and storied history.
Indeed it does. It seems that some things are just timeless.
Absolutely. So Behn takes this body tale from Boccaccio by way of Middleton and Killigrew and weaves it into her own play. It's really fascinating to see how The Rover is this tapestry woven from all these different threads.
It really is. And this tradition of reworking classic tales speaks to their enduring appeal, their ability to resonate with audiences across time and cultures.
It's like there's something about these stories that just keeps us coming back for more. But let's shift the spotlight a little bit from the source material to the stage itself. How was The Rover received by audiences? Was it a hit?
The Rover was a sensation, especially in the 18th century.
Wow. Wow.
It enjoyed numerous revivals, and audiences were captivated by the characters,
Mhm.
particularly the rakish and charming Wilmore.
Those roguish characters always seem to have a way of stealing the show.
They do, and there's actually a fantastic anecdote about William Mountford,
Okay.
the actor who played Wilmore. Apparently, he was so convincing in his portrayal that Queen Mary herself remarked that it was dangerous to see him act. He made Vice so alluring.
That's incredible. That really speaks to the power of a good performance.
It does.
I mean, a skilled actor can really breathe life into a character, even influence how the audience perceives their morality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, I think it's time we move beyond the surface,
Yeah.
beyond the costumes and the sets, and really delve into the heart of the Rover, into those scenes that reveal its true essence.
Okay, I'm game. What scenes from the excerpts that we have, what really stood out to you?
Well, the conversations between Florinda and Helena immediately grabbed my attention.
Interesting.
Their contrasting views on love and marriage
Okay.
really shed light on the societal pressures and expectations placed upon women during that era.
Right. It was a very different time for women.
Indeed it was. And you have Florinda, bound by tradition and duty, trying to reconcile her own desires with the path that's been laid out for her. And then you have Helena, bursting with this rebellious energy, determined to forge her own path regardless of convention.
And what about Wilmore? I mean, his first encounter with Angelica Bianca is just brilliant. That blunt assessment of her profession. Classic Wilmore.
Oh, he certainly doesn't mince words, does he?
No, he does not.
He's charming, he's witty, he's completely unafraid to speak his mind. But there's also that vulnerability beneath that roguish exterior, just a hint of something deeper.
You know, now that you mention it, I am starting to see the Rover in a new light.
Good.
It's not just this lighthearted romp through the world of Restoration comedy. There's depth, there's social commentary, there's even a hint of danger lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. And Ben masterfully blends all of these elements together to create a world that's both entertaining and thought-provoking.
So where do we go from here?
Well, we've talked about the origins of the Rover,
Yeah.
the web of influences that shaped it, its impact on audiences. But I think it's time we explore how W. Ben achieved this masterful adaptation.
Okay.
Remember, she was working with a 10-act beast of a play. So what did she choose to keep?
Yeah.
What did she toss aside, and how does she make those borrowed elements her own?
Yeah, it's like she had this big block of marble, Killadrew's play, and she had to chip away at it
Right.
to reveal the masterpiece hidden inside.
That's a wonderful way to put it.
Yeah.
Ben had a keen eye for what worked on stage. She knew how to streamline the plot, sharpen the dialogue, and really highlight those moments that would captivate the audience. Like, for instance, the scene where Wilmore first encounters Angelica.
Right.
Killigrew's version, it's quite drawn out.
Yeah, right.
And it lacks that spark, that witty repartee that Ben is so famous for.
So she injected it with her own style, her own brand of wit and energy.
Precisely. She understood the power of a well-placed double entendre, the art of creating subtext and tension through language. And remember, she was writing for a very specific audience.
Right, the Restoration Theater crowd.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Known for their love of spectacle, their appetite for witty banter, and let's be honest, a bit of scandal now and then.
Oh, absolutely.
Ben knew her audience, and she gave them what they craved. But she also pushed boundaries. She tackled complex themes of love, marriage, and social mobility, all within the context of this vibrant comedic world.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, let's talk about Aphra Behn herself for a moment. I mean, she was a woman writing for the theater in the 1670s. That was practically unheard of.
It was incredibly rare. The theater was a male-dominated world, both in terms of writing and performing. So for a woman to break into that sphere took immense talent and courage.
She was a true trailblazer.
Absolutely.
Paving the way for future generations of female playwrights.
And her work often challenged conventional notions of gender roles and female agency.
Interesting.
Her female characters are vibrant, witty, and driven by their own desires, which wasn't always the case in plays written by men during that era.
Right. It's like she's giving a voice to a whole segment of society that was often overlooked or silenced.
Precisely. And she does it with such intelligence and humor. She doesn't preach, she entertains. But there's always that sharp social commentary woven through her work, prompting the audience to think about the world around them.
This is fascinating. We've talked about the source material, Ben's remarkable adaptation process, and her own unique context as a playwright. But what about the play itself? What makes The Rover such a compelling and enduring piece of theater?
Well, for one thing, the characters are so richly drawn. You have Wilmore, The charismatic rogue, he embodies both the charm and the dangers of a life lived on the edge. He's a character that constantly keeps you guessing.
He's not your typical virtuous hero.
No, he's not. And
Yeah.
then there's Angelica Bianca,
Right.
the courtesan who challenges societal expectations at every turn. She's strong, she's independent, and she's capable of both deep love and fierce anger.
It's like she's both a product of her time and a woman ahead of her time.
Exactly. And then we have the two sisters, Florinda and Helena, each representing a different response to societal pressures. Florinda trying to navigate the complexities of love and duty within the confines of her social position, and Helena rebelling against those constraints, seeking freedom and self-expression on her own terms.
And we can't forget about Blunt. I mean, he's the comic relief, stumbling from one misadventure to another, but even his escapades kind of reveal something about the darker undercurrents of the play's world.
Oh, absolutely. His encounters with Lucetta, the cunning courtesan, are hilarious, but they also highlight the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of all that revelry and romance. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even in a world of laughter and wit, there are consequences to one's actions.
It's like Ben is constantly playing with our expectations, blending humor and social commentary, light and shadow, to create this really multifaceted experience.
Precisely, and that's part of what makes the Rover so engaging. It's a world of wit, romance, and intrigue, but there's always an edge, a sense that things could go awry at any moment.
So it's not just a lighthearted romp. There's depth, there's social commentary, there's a sense of danger lurking beneath the surface of all that gaiety.
Exactly, and it's that combination of elements that makes the Rover such a fascinating and enduring work. Ben takes these familiar tropes of comedy and romance, and she breathes new life into them, creating a world that's both entertaining and thought-provoking.
So where does this leave us? What should we be taking away from this deep dive into the Rover?
Well, I think it reminds us that even in a world where borrowing and adaptation were common practice, a skilled playwright like Aphra Behn could still create something original and utterly compelling.
It's like she took those borrowed elements and made them her own,
Yes,
infused them with her unique voice and perspective.
precisely. And in doing so, she challenged conventions. She gave voice to often marginalized perspectives. And she created a work that continues to resonate with audiences centuries later.
I'm starting to see the Rover in a whole new light now. Knowing the context, understanding Ben's creative process, it just makes the play even richer, more complex, more meaningful.
That's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It allows us to peel back the layers, to uncover the hidden connections and influences that shape a work of art.
And it makes me appreciate Aphra Behn even more. She was a true innovator, a master of her craft, a voice that deserved to be heard and continues to resonate with us today.
And that brings us to a question for you to consider. Knowing about all of these borrowed elements, how does it change your view of Aphra Behn's originality and skill as a playwright?
It's a tough question
It is.
because you could say she's building on the work of others,
Right.
but she's doing so much more than just copying
Whoa.
or rehashing.
Absolutely.
She's taking these existing pieces and making something totally new.
She really is. And it's not just about the source material itself.
Right.
It's about what she does with it.
Exactly.
Her wit, her character development, her ability to weave in social commentary. That's all Behn.
It's not plagiarism.
No.
It's creative alchemy.
I like that.
Taking something old and making it new again.
Yes.
Breathing fresh life into it. And making it relevant for a new audience.
And that skill, that ability to adapt and transform,
Right.
that's just as valuable today as it was back in the 17th century.
That's so true.
Think about how many of our most popular stories are adaptations of classic works.
I know it's true.
From Shakespeare to Greek myths to fairy tales.
Yeah.
It seems like we never tire of finding new ways to reimagine these timeless stories.
I know. And it makes you wonder, what is it about these stories that we keep coming back to?
It really does.
Across time and cultures.
I think it speaks to the enduring power of these stories,
Mm-hmm.
their ability to transcend time and place, to speak to us across generations. But it also takes a skilled artist to reinterpret them, to find something new and relevant to say.
Just like Ben did with the Rover.
Exactly.
She took this forgotten play and through her talent and vision transformed it into a masterpiece that we're still talking about today.
Absolutely. And that's the magic of theater, isn't it? And that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding. It allows us to peel back the layers, to appreciate the artistry and the craft that goes into creating something that resonates so deeply.
This has been a real eye-opening experience for me.
Yep.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of the Rover
Wonderful.
and a deeper appreciation for Aphra Behn's genius.
Well, for those of you who are eager to delve even deeper into Behn's work,
Yes.
I highly recommend exploring some of her other plays, like The City Heiress or The Lucky Chance.
Okay.
They're full of her trademark wit, intrigue, and those wonderfully complex female characters she's so famous for.
I've already added them to my list.
Excellent.
And of course, the world of Restoration comedy in general is just full of fascinating plays
It is.
that are just waiting to be rediscovered.
A world waiting to be explored.
Exactly.
So for all of our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering those hidden treasures of the past.
That is a great note to end on.
I think so.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Aphra Behn's The Rover.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those minds curious